Hi, it's Julia James Davis, and welcome to The War on Beauty. Today we are going to talk about fashion. Andrew Breitbart said, "Politics is downstream from culture, that to shift politics, one must change culture." And I completely agree. However, I'm going to specify that further and say that politics is downstream from fashion. This is something that I thought of while I was scrolling on Instagram one day, and post after post after post. And look, I mainly just follow fashion accounts because I love fashion, but post after post after post was political, and these were from fashion accounts. And not only were the posts political, but they were all the same. They were all saying the same things in unison, the exact same opinions and talking points. And I was like, how is that possible? How does every fashion brand, every magazine, every fashion influencer have the same exact politics? That just seems like statistically, you wouldn't have one person that might think a little bit differently. Well, no, because I think that fashion is a main propaganda arm of the uni-party government that is aiming to shape a very, very important group of voters, and that is young women. This coordinated effort by the fashion industry is saying, if you want to be cool, if you want to be fashionable, if you want to be hip, you want to be in, you want to be brat, you better think in these very narrow lines, which is usually ultra feminist, pro drag queen kindergarten, anti patriarchy, and pro abortion above all else.
Would you rather have a democracy or access to abortions?
Either or. I feel like that's a very tough question to answer. I feel like that's almost not possible to answer. I feel like I couldn't pick one or the other. I guess access to abortions.
Noticeably, too, as fashion is going down this way, fashion and clothing and advertisements and magazines are getting increasingly ugly, which I believe is no accident. I think that the destruction of beauty is the ultimate goal in this culture war, which I term the war on beauty. So, for example, and I was going onto the websites of some of these magazines like Vogue and Teen Vogue, and I found a video. First of all, I'll insert some pictures, but every single one of these supposed fashion publications, most of what they write about is politics, really hyping leftist politics. So Team Vogue on their website had a video of young voters where they were discussing in a forum what the important issues were in the upcoming election to them. So these were the important topics of the election to these young voters as laid out by Teen Vogue. The responsibility of cis men, states' rights, sex ed in schools, and protesting. This magazine has a readership demographic that is mainly young girls, like tween to young 20s. And all of this is very consequential, and it's not just about these non-issues, like cis men is not an issue per se in the election. I don't know where that came from, honestly. But rather, what is really important about this is the laundering of leftist politics through this fashion, feminist, anti-patriarchy cover. Because that is not what the left really cares about. They don't really care about the responsibility of cis men. But rather it's a cover for their true policy, which is their unspoken policy of forever wars, taxation to death, and ultimately the destruction of America. And I would venture to guess that these young fashion-forward girls and boys don't know this, but they are greenwashing fashion as a front for all of this to entice young voters to put their vote behind something that appears to just be vibes, but it's actually much more serious than that. And I really want to talk about this because I absolutely love fashion. I think that it's such an important space for uplift and self-elevation and just pure fun. But I'm just starting to notice a trend of an increasing politicization of fashion when it really shouldn't be. And as I'm scrolling through Instagram mainly, all these accounts are starting to post about politics as much as they are about fashion. So why is this happening? Well, we know that people are not platformed unless they are usually given a platform, and I'm speaking kind of broadly, but people get platformed when they serve the interests of the government propaganda machine. And if people do happen to gain a large following on their own, usually somewhere down the line, they're asked to promote certain things or speak in a certain way or compromise on certain things. So, and I think a large part of this is because fashion is controlled in such few hands. It's a very corporate space. There are mega conglomerates in fashion that pool brands and fashion publications under huge umbrella companies, which are usually in lockstep with the government to push a certain agenda. So as an example of the increasing corporatization of fashion, I'm going to share about LVMH, which is one of the largest companies in the world. Its owner, Bernard Arnault, is the world's richest man. LVMH stands for Louis Vuitton, Moet, Hennessy, and they own the following fashion brands: Dior, Givenchy, Fendi, Celine, Tiffany & Co., Louis Vuitton, Marc Jacobs, Loewe, Bulgari, Pucci, Sephora, and so on. In total, they own 75 luxury brands. And what is not owned by LVMH is owned by their rival Kering, who also owns so many fashion brands. So that's almost every fashion brand that you can think of is owned by LVMH. And then, as another example, there is one publisher in fashion, Condé Nast, that owns the following magazines: Vogue, The New Yorker, Allure, GQ, Vanity Fair, Wired, Architectural Digest, Teen Vogue, Tatler, Pitchfork, Glamour, Self Magazine, Bon Appetit, and many others. What's not listed here is owned by Hearst Publications, who owns Elle, Esquire, Town & Country, and they also own 24 daily, 52 weekly newspapers, and 35 television stations, local and cable. So this just shows the huge monopolization of fashion. It's not just independent creatives that are, or even like well-dressed girls posting their Instagrams of their outfits. This is a huge corporate industry. But what about independent fashion media? Well, there are independent accounts, and one of the ones that I would like to highlight, Diet Prada, is a fashion news and commentary account. And this is the account that got me thinking about all of this, because all of a sudden, almost all of their Instagrams are political, but not just political, but specifically leftist political with a divisive woke agenda. So it's not just something that's pushed by these big brands, but also what you would think are independents. So it's really no surprise that fashion has no vibe anymore. It's not beautiful, because it is literally an outcrop of corporate hegemony, which is an outcrop of political hegemony. Who is the one first lady who did not get a Vogue cover? Melania Trump. Every single first lady has been given a Vogue cover. That is just part of being a first lady. That is just part. Actually, you know what? She did have a Vogue cover, and it was before it was on her wedding, I think, to Donald Trump, that she was on the cover of Vogue. But that was before everything, when everybody still loved Donald Trump because he was just a wealthy man, and everybody loves wealthy men, until they get, I guess, conservative and do what he did, which, okay. If you're a first lady, you just get given a Vogue cover. And I just think that is insane. And that's just a great example of this is a fashion mafia. This is a authoritarian fashion mafia. And if you want to be part of it, you better get in lockstep with our agenda, with our talking points. And this is just actually so dangerous because so many young girls, including myself, just love fashion. And if you want to be part of it, you have to adopt these values. You have to be a feminist, you have to be pro-abortion, you have to be pro-LGBTQ, you have to. That's literally part of it. You can't be cute, fashionable if you are conservative. You can't. It's just like seen as an anathema to that. So yeah, this is why fashion has no vibe anymore, because it is a fashion mafia that is aimed to propagandize the youth and brainwash people into voluntarily making themselves ugly, which I will explain. I know this because what is happening in fashion with pushing this anti-feminine, anti-beautiful clothing, designs, all of that is following an exact playbook that the CIA implemented after World War II through the CCF, the Congress for Cultural Freedom. The CCF elevated abstract expressionist artists like Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and so on. They bankrolled these artists and pushed them to the top of the artistic game, gave them shows at MoMA, which traveled the world. They basically astroturfed this modern art movement in order to show how artistically free and liberal the United States was. This was a part of the Cold War culture. It was the Cold War. This is a tongue twister. This was part of the cultural Cold War. The reason the United States wanted to push this art that everybody thought was ugly and depressing, this was not a popular art movement. Everybody thought this is just splatters on a canvas or like a canvas painted black. This is not beautiful. It's not art. Was just to show how diametrically opposite this art was to the art being produced by the USSR, which was very traditionally beautiful and like oil paintings, very realistically portrayed, very classical art. And there was strong rules around what artists in the USSR were allowed to paint. So by the US flaunting that they had these artists that could just paint whatever they want, even if it was super ugly, we were a free culture. I believe that the same thing is happening here, where the government, via the fashion apparatus, is pushing for ugly and ridiculously non-traditional clothing and fashion in an attempt to show how free and progressive America is. And interestingly enough, I'm going to go so far as to say that we are still in a culture war. We are still in a cultural Cold War with non-Western countries. And funny enough, our main foe happens to still be the former USSR, Russia. Very interesting. And I'm just going to prove this by saying President Putin this week just signed a decree stating that Moscow will provide assistance to any foreigners who want to escape the neoliberal ideas being put forward in their countries to move to Russia, where traditional values reign supreme. So fashion is one of the many ways the US is propagandizing its own population and the rest of the world to whom we still export a lot of our culture in order to secure political fealty through vibes instead of concrete policy. So amidst the sea of lib fashion girlies, there are the rare unicorns of traditional influencers like Ballerina Farms and Nara Smith that happen to get popular. And I see why they're popular. Like, their content is great and they have like amazing lives. But it's just so interesting how by these women who are dressing in a traditionally feminine way, who choose to have children instead of climbing the corporate ladder, they are demonized by mainstream media who say they are actually victims of patriarchal oppression. So, why does all this matter? This is not just about Kamala Harris being a Democrat, and it's not even about fashion or party politics. This is all being used as a cover for what is really going on. This is all fashion propaganda to manipulate people, specifically young girls, into supporting and voting for what is ultimately their own demise. The anti-patriarchy feminism pushed through fashion, which is militantly pro-abortion and generally anti-marriage, is leading to a precipitous drop-off of marriage and fertility and birth rates. According to Morgan Stanley, 45% of women between 25 and 44 years old will be single by 2030, single and childless. And 1 in 4 women are on antidepressants compared to 8.4% of men. So the propaganda that is pushed through fashion is creating an environment for forever alone women, hopelessness, and disconnectedness from nature and God. If not rectified, this all spells the end of the human race. And I know that sounds dramatic to draw fashion to the end of the human race, but it's literally true. The fun slogans of Brat are running interference for a very serious operation that is being implemented in America with the support of an important voting bloc, the young girls. The persecution of beauty in the United States is a very, very sharp weapon in the culture war and ultimately the war on humanity. I cannot understate the value and importance of all of this as a discussion to be had, especially among young girls who love fashion, who love culture. And if this is all interesting to you, I ask that you please follow me and share. I'm going to be making a lot of videos exactly along these lines, talking about how our fashion, our music, our architecture, our art have all been persecuted and stripped of all beauty in order to create hopelessness and ultimately cutting off people from God. And I know that the solution to this is talking about it, having a discourse about it, and ultimately looking to God as our hope. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.